So today we're going to be talking about power hungry and emotionally unavailable / starved in love. So for today, if you have ever found yourself caught in a power struggle with your partner, and each of you feels like you want to be the right and true truth teller of the relationship, but the more you tend to assert your position, typically the more alienated and disconnected you start to feel from each other, then this is a video segment for you. Inside, you might feel like you are crying and that you are lost and lonely and wanting so bad to connect with your partner, but no matter what you do, it only seems to either drive you further apart and or you feel like you just have to armor up every time each of you seeks a level of connection with one another. And so when individuals find themselves caught in this kind of insecure relationship dynamic, it's usually because both partners actually feel quite powerless to change their situation. Okay, and they think that the happiness that they want to experience is completely dependent upon the thoughts, feelings, actions, and or behaviors of their partners. And so we have a tendency to respond very fearfully and defensively to one another, and our relationships become these kind of power plays for control, right? And so when we operate from a fear-based place, we wind up behaving in a manner that is power hungry, and that is because we feel quite essentially powerless. But if we can continue to operate from a premise that you must have the most perfect partner in order to feel the best that you could possibly feel about yourself or about anything else, then one of two things usually happens. And the first is that eventually partners will begin to express emotional unavailability, okay, as a means of managing their risk and avoiding being blamed or criticized for failing in their job, right, which is to make you happy, because that creates a conflict in relationship. Now, the second thing that happens is they may become over-controlling and sometimes over-giving as an attempt to reestablish connection with a partner because they actually feel quite powerless and emotionally starved. But they're two sides of the same coin, okay? So in either case, what we're doing is we're both trying to assert a sense of power and agency in the best way that we know how, because we're trying to feed what I call our attachment hunger, which is the voice of our primitive limbic brain telling us that we need to act in a certain way in order to ensure our survival needs are met. Okay, and so in today's video, we're going to dig into why that happens, and we're going to talk about 3 myths, or what I like to think of as false premises, that we may be operating under in those circumstances. And so if you don't know me, my name is Brianna McWilliam, and I'm a licensed and board certified creative arts therapist, author, and educator. I've been in the field for about 13 years now, and I am just wild about helping adults who struggle with insecure attachment in their relationships go from feeling fearful and confused to stepping into what I call their self-sovereignty and calling in those soul-shaking, passionate partnerships that they want, and doing that without having to talk in circles around their feelings for hours or even years on end with no tangible result. And I do this using a psycho-spiritual approach to implementing creative arts interventions through the framework of attachment theory. And my method has 3 major steps, and that is cognitive reframing, body activation, and arts-based experiential. So today we are tapping into a bit of cognitive reframing to help you reframe the way that you think about things, okay? So today's topic was really inspired by a question posed on my online community. And this one was in particular posed under the video I did on YouTube for Disorganized Attachment 101. And the question, to paraphrase, was something like this. You said that people with disorganized attachment can sometimes emotionally back their partners into a corner, which forces the partner to dole out an ultimatum and ultimately leave them. The unconscious motivation is to place the blame of the relationship ending onto the partner and relieve the anxiety of waiting for the other shoe to drop. This resonates with me, and you did a really amazing job of having empathy for people like me, but I worry about it because I also feel like when you say that we back our partners into a corner, it means that it's on us that our partners left. And I want to know if that means it's all the disorganized partner's fault. Like, this is just the worst attachment style to have, and therefore we are always the one who are enacting the wrongdoing. Okay. So I typically refer to individuals with disorganized attachment as spice of lifers because they have a finger on the pulse of life. They are deeply entrenched in the contrasts of life. And because of oftentimes they can feel great pain, I feel they also have great calling. But it doesn't necessarily mean that they have any more or less responsibility than anybody else to be in charge of their own actions. Okay. So I feel like this is a very good question, and it really reflects a primary concern that all individuals with insecure attachment have, and that is a concern with being right or wrong, worse or better, or preoccupied with assigning fault in a relationship. Okay. And so whether it is to yourself or to a partner, meaning whether you take on all the blame or whether you give it all to them, right? And so rather than getting even further mired, in that momentum of trying to dig deep for the right or wrong answer to this question per se, which would actually be feeding the beast, right? I would have you kind of take a step outside of the content of this question and examine the dimension on which it falls instead. And so I would like to start by examining those 3 myths and false premises that actually underlie even posing a question like this. So the first myth is that there is a right and a wrong way to be. And if you are right, you are somehow more powerful. And so then blame is really the best tool to regain or assert your power or deflect from the idea that you might be wrong, like you might be the one who's in the wrong, okay? But the truth is that a preoccupation with black and white thinking like this actually perpetuates these damaging ideas about worthiness, okay? And it limits your possibilities in life and in love. And it's also a perpetual cycle that nobody can get out of. So every adult is responsible for themselves to a great degree, and then as a collective, we pick up the slack for those that cannot be responsible for themselves because for whatever reason, they've been dealt an uneven hand. So for example, this could be the impoverished or the underprivileged. It could be refugees who have been displaced. It could be abandoned or abused or neglected children. It could be the feeble and the elderly. It could be those that struggle with severe mental illness issues or with some kind of incapacity, like a chronic illness or a disability, for example. Okay. But even in the context of relationships, the goal is not to be so anti-dependent, let's say, that there's no reciprocation with someone else. So the question here really reflects a concern about how much power, if that is the case, how much power you actually have in an intimate relationship versus how much power your partner actually has. And the concern with power dynamics like that becomes the biggest obstacle to really connecting in an authentic way. So you become very concerned with who's the winner, who's on top, who's right, who's more or less at fault, right? And so then when you do that, you're not able to connect on an authentic level because you're always kind of provoking and poking each other, right? Your partner is always in opposition to you, and that's kind of like exposing yourself to the enemy, like I said. So a relationship involves 2 people. At least in this circumstance, we're going to talk about a relationship involving 2 people. And so extricating yourself from a toxic dance in which you are always concerned about who started it is never easy. But if you think finding your way out is by assigning blame to someone else, it's just not a very effective strategy. However, blame does have a role to play in the process of raising your conscious awareness about it, which inevitably makes it possible for you to show up more authentically. So this brings us to the second myth, which is that blame is always bad and being blamey makes you a victim. Okay. And the truth is, yes and no. Blame, like everything else, has its time and place. Okay, so oftentimes you'll hear self-help books telling you to stop blaming other people for your problems in order to take charge of your life. But individuals with insecure attachment, some individuals with insecure attachment frequently have a problem of taking on too much blame. Okay, and I want you to realize that that is the equal and opposite side of giving too much blame, right? You are believing in the same doctrine. You're just assuming a different role within that belief system. Okay, so this is where we can find, for those of you that take on too much blame, this is where we might find blame's utility. Okay, because blame has an important place in the process of reclaiming what I think of as your self-sovereignty, which is a form of personal authority. So laying blame where it actually belongs can be a form of surrendering to the idea that you don't actually have as much control as you think you do, right? And that allows you to have these kind of helpless feelings that you don't let yourself express. And once you let yourself express the helpless, powerless feelings, then that gives permission for a whole host of other repressed feelings to express themselves as well. And likely that have been blocking you for a long time. And so when you let yourself have those feelings you've been so terrified of feeling, you unblock it. And all those other emotions now get to evolve. Emotions like anger, frustration, antagonism, but also motivation, desire, connection, and eventually love and increased personal agency. Because anger is a step up from helplessness or powerlessness. Blame is a step up from helplessness or powerlessness, right? But then you keep evolving once you pop the cork on them. And so equally, assuming blame if it is deserved, on the other hand, other side of this coin, assuming blame if it is deserved and offering restitution can also help open up those channels as well, particularly if you're someone who's always deflecting blame, right? Because you are always perpetuating this idea that you have no control. So once you arrive at this experience of personal agency, that means that you have a full range of emotional expression that is now at your disposal, and you can stop getting stuck in the quicksand of assigning fault or blame, right? Whether it is to yourself or to someone else. So I would say, let's define blame as a practice of laying fault where it actually belongs and then assuming responsibility what is truly yours to inhabit, which thankfully can be a lot less than what you actually think it is, especially if you're someone who takes too much on yourself. And that actually opens you up to feeling more abundant and more generous with what responsibilities you might be willing to take on from a place of kindness and compassion, as opposed to a place of shame and guilt and needing to feel like you are in the right high moral ground, or feeling like you need to exert power because at your core you actually feel powerless. Okay? And so, again, you can't control somebody else's behavior, but what you can control is the wisdom you take away from the experiences you have in interacting with them. Okay. And so this is the third myth. My power is destructive and will alienate me from my lovers. If I accept my power, I must accept both the blame and the responsibility, and it will all be my fault. I will be proven the bad or the wrong one in this situation. So the truth is, when you fear your own power, you perpetuate the good, bad, right, wrong split inside your mind and in your heart. And that is actually what keeps you feeling alienated, because it keeps you in a defensive position and vilifying your partners. So in essence, you have to accept that you are a little bad. We're all a little bad. We're all a little selfish, right? You have to be willing to embrace that part of yourself to be able to actually show up authentically. Okay. And so we fear our power so much that we often would prefer to remain in a painful pattern, because to assume our power would be to say, I'm done. This is enough. I don't need to convince you or anybody else of anything, not of what I'm worth, not of what you owe me, not of what I owe you, or of what either of us does or does not deserve. None of it. That is not my job. It is exhausting. It's never ending, and I have the power to walk away from this at any time and to change this pattern at any time, because nothing you can do or say will detract from what I know to be my value and of what I know to be your value, right? But we don't entertain those notions, right? We don't entertain those notions because you actually have to have quite a bit of personal agency, what I call self-sovereignty, in order to hold that position in real earnest. And we think if we are to step into our power in this way, then we become responsible for too much. And that is often what insecure individuals struggle with. Knowing what is theirs and what is not. Trusting that they have their own power and their sense of agency, and trusting that others do too, right? So it can lead to a butting up against partners and testing them and wanting to experience our partners as more powerful than us because we're afraid of our power. We think, finally, here's someone that can contain and handle me. right? And then there's the person who avoids all conflict, not because they think they have no power, but because they are afraid they have too much. And if they were to pop the cork on it, then they would explode and leave devastation in their wake and in their relationships, right? On the other side of that coin, we have someone who always needs to assert their control and their power over people because they are constantly questioning their power and they want to explore the boundaries of it. How far is this person going to let me go? And that then becomes a measure of my influence over them, and then that convinces me of something about myself, right? Because I don't know it already for myself. So these dynamics typically evolve because our parents gave us too much authority as children, meaning our parents told us that we were making them feel a certain way, or that we were burdening them in some fashion, or that we were ruining their lives somehow. Even if they punish you severely, even corporally, in a seemingly authoritarian environment, while they were trying to prove their authority over you, they were really only proving your authority over them, which is that your behavior compelled them to act in ways that hurt them more than it hurt you. Well, if that's really the case, then who's in charge here? Right? And so as children, we are given and assume tremendous power that is not really ours to have at that age. And so as adults, we don't want it because we've not been allowed to emotionally mature in a normal fashion. But we've come to believe that that's what we've got to work with. That's just our lot in life. And so we take on too much, even though we don't want to, or we assume very little for fear of being given too much. And so in revolt, internally or unconsciously, we sometimes feel compelled to inadvertently create or be attracted to situations in which the opposite would have to be proven to us, like backing a partner into a corner in order to provoke an outcome. Because if you were to witness, let's say, an unexpected outcome, somehow that would leave you feeling more hopeful. So you're always chasing this kind of hope. But the thing is, it's not on somebody else to prove to us what we are and are not responsible for. And just because they don't behave in an unexpected fashion doesn't mean they don't love you. And it doesn't mean that they don't harbor the feelings and the power that you wish they did. And it doesn't mean that your influence is stronger than theirs. This is not a barometer for how powerful you are or how powerful you are not. More often than not, it's simply a measure of how authentically both of you are willing to show up. And how authentically you are willing to show up is typically concurrent with how willing you are to accept yourself as you are right now. And that is an acceptance that we have to arrive through an internal process. Okay, so when it comes down to it, everybody makes their own choices. They do. And though our choices, I have to say, are not all equally conscious ones. They're not all equally conscious choices in the way that as an adult, you can understand a lot more than a child. And you wouldn't blame a child for making a poor decision or being mad for not letting them do something that you know is not good for them, simply because you know that you have a far broader perspective, right? So would it be useful in that case to punish or blame a child for not knowing what they don't know? For accusing them of not understanding what life has not yet yielded to them through their experience, for blaming them, for taking it personally, for thinking that it's a malicious attack upon you, when they just don't know, when they're just not that conscious. It's actually cruel, okay? Now, equally as adults, on the other hand, if we do not regard the power that we do have, if we do not regard the power that we do have to discover these things for ourselves, we end up infantilizing our partners. And we remain locked in unhealthy cycles of taking on too much responsibility for them, rescuing to the point of preventing them from experiencing the growth of their own contrast and agency, right? So more specifically, if you back a partner into a corner because you want them to prove something to you about yourself, and they go about doing it, let's say demonstrating that they are more powerful than you in your perception after all, and so you don't have to assume all the blame that you think you need to assume, then they have in effect robbed you of an opportunity to prove something to yourself. And they have, in effect, robbed you of an opportunity to grow into your own agency, to not need someone else to prove to you how much power you do in or do not have, because you know the boundaries of your own influence for yourself and that of your partner without needing to exaggerate or minimize them. And so, as we become increasingly conscious of the impulses that compel us, our choices start to feel a hell of a lot more like our own. Okay. And then the dance between partners becomes a lot more clear, meaning I know that this belongs to me and that belongs to you. And I'm choosing to engage in a needs exchange because of the delightful joyfulness that comes out of that, not because I need to claw and grasp at you like someone drowning, right? Like gasping for air, because I have no sense of my own center. I don't know how to float on my own. And so as we become increasingly conscious of the impulses that compel us, right, the need for testing oneself and our partners becomes far less compelling, right? Power plays are less arousing. And the cycle of emotional unavailability, which is truly a form of emotional starvation for all parties involved, loses its luster because you don't feel so powerless anymore. And so not every measured action or verbalization that comes out of your mouth stems from a place of powerlessness, right? And so at that point, you can stop vying for a head start and actually experience what it's like to walk life's path together hand in hand instead of trying to nudge each other off the path, right? So I hope that helps answering that question that was raised in the beginning. And basically what I want to talk about here in essence is that when we are so concerned with influence, we stop showing up.